captures for me the human condition under God in a most powerful way. So, excuse me while I get my voice back. I want to look at this opening part of John's last vision, the vision of the New Jerusalem. He says, "And I saw the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne, saying, 'See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them, and they will be his peoples. And God himself will be with them. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. Death will be no more. Mourning and crying and pain will be no more, for the first things have passed away.'" Now look how similar this is. I believe it was inspired by the Isaiah Apocalypse, the little part in the beginning of 1st Isaiah that also has a revelation of God's victory. "On this mountain," and the mountain, of course, is Zion, "the Lord of hosts will make for all peoples a feast of rich food, a feast of well-aged wine, of rich food filled with marrow, of well-aged wines strained clear. And he will destroy on this mountain the shroud that is cast over all peoples, the sheet that is spread over all nations. He will swallow up death forever. Then the Lord God will wipe away the tears from all faces, and the disgrace of his people he will take away from all the earth, for the Lord has spoken." That vision from Isaiah 25 is taken from the sort of standard way an ancient Near Eastern general would celebrate his victory at the end of a war. It's a little gruesome, as if we haven't had enough violence already. The custom was for the victorious general to kill and cook and eat his defeated enemy. Ooh, yeah. But this time, the picture is of God killing and cooking and eating death. Now the curious thing is that when the inspiration that comes from Isaiah shows up in Revelation, it's a somewhat different picture. Instead of being a conquering warrior who eats his enemy's carcass at the victory feast, the seer says God is instead preparing a wedding banquet. And the holy city, rather than being the battered woman that she was earlier in the book, comes dressed as a bride. The gates of the city will never be shut all day, and there will be no night there, says the seer. And that proves that all the threats have been done away with. There's no need to close the gates because there's no danger anymore. All the prophetic longing for the day when the earth worships God in unison is finally fulfilled. Oops, I forgot to follow myself. People will bring to it the glory and honor of the nations. Did you notice that in the vision, the opening of the vision, the seer says that all the nations of the earth will be God's peoples, plural. There's no domination by Israel of all the other nations so that it suddenly becomes a single nation. Now it's all the nations. Later in the vision, he's going to say that the tree is for the healing of the nations, plural. So for all that John is looking for vindication for the people of the land, even he doesn't go so far as to suggest that in the end, God homogenizes the world. and makes everybody the same. And then the name of God replaces the mark of the beast, and the people that the Lamb has redeemed are rescued from the clutches of the dragon. Now, this is no pie-in-the-sky wishful thinking. John is utterly convinced that God can be trusted to keep these promises. 4 times in the epistolary conclusion, that's fancy language for saying, remember I told you this is an open letter? The book opens and closes like a letter. And in the closing of the letter, he says 4 times that Jesus is coming soon. I want to tell you a little story about my teacher, J. Christian Becker. He was a Dutchman, and he had grown up in a pastor's home in Haarlem in the Netherlands, a very successful pastor who was a leader of the Dutch Reformed Church. And during World War II, when the Nazis invaded Haarlem, they conscripted all the young men of a certain age, and that included my friend Chris Becker. He was 17 years old, and he was taken by train to Berlin, where he worked in a factory for the German war effort as a slave. It was excruciating, and during that time, the Allied bombing began in Berlin in earnest. By the grace of God, Chris caught typhoid and was outside of the barracks, the slave barracks, when the bombs from the United States and British flyers leveled it. He was in what they called a hospital where there was no medical treatment, and he was able, because of the kindness of a nurse, to get some shoes and some clothes and to begin the long walk from Berlin back to Haarlem. Eventually he got on a train, so he didn't have to walk the whole way. During that time, Chris suffered enormously, and in later life it manifested itself in a bipolar syndrome that would give him enormous highs of energy and enthusiasm and tremendous lows of depression and despair. And it's really quite remarkable that his scholarly output was nevertheless quite remarkable. I tell you this story because he was a little on the eccentric side, as you might imagine. And every morning that I knew him until the day he died, Chris would wake up and open the window and stick his head out and say, "Is it today, Lord? Is it today, Lord?" His own experience of suffering made him extraordinarily aware of the suffering of others, and that awareness kept him from ever thinking that God had finished with him or with us or with the world. And to this day, he's been dead almost 10 years, my memory of Chris is asking, "Is it today, Lord?" inspires me not to let go either of the longing for the completion of the promises of God.